Oil is the mainstay, the lubricant that allows Russia to continue to fight the war. The oil price, because of these tariff wars, has dropped. It's dropped a good 15 to 20%, and we're now talking about around $51 per barrel for Urals, which is the Urals crude, which is the type of oil that Russia sells, and that's far below the level that Russia is comfortable operating at. And if these oil prices were to stay this low for long or go lower, we could end up seeing Russia going into a real economic catastrophe. And if they do that, then Putin is just less able to continue to execute the war the way he's been doing it.
But we're saying Putin at the same time. We've talked of the West's access to the U.S. defense industrial base. Russia's defense industrial base clearly isn't up to it. What level of corruption is there still within that? And we're seeing Russia having to get closer to China, to North Korea, to Iran. And I saw recent estimates that up to 80% of Russia's artillery ammunition is coming from North Korea, proving that it can't sustain its own manufacturing. And we've got the reports of Chinese soldiers being captured in the front line. And in fact, in a press conference last night run by the Ukrainians, the two Chinese soldiers turned around and said that the Russians had tried to kill them with chemical weapons rather than let them be captured. These are all signs of desperation. Is Putin that desperate? And what do you think Xi Jinping will be getting out of this from Russia? What's the debt that's going to be there, and the likelihood of him then having to call that in at some stage in the future?
Well, I would say that Russia is in a very desperate situation. If you look at the Ukrainian estimates, they've lost around 940,000 soldiers, either to death or disability, 11,000 tanks, 45,000 vehicles. I mean, not to mention $300 billion of foreign exchange reserves being frozen abroad and other terrible things from their perspective. None of these things would be acceptable in any type of situation where the leader was accountable in any way. So Putin is an unaccountable leader. He's not worried about the people, the voters of Russia. He's not worried about the parliament. He's not worried about the press. He's not worried about the laws. He's totally unaccountable. And therefore, even though he's in a desperate situation and the losses that they've incurred are completely, in a democratic country, we couldn't have sustained 1/100th of their losses without the people kicking out the leader. But he can carry on running his country into the ground for a lot longer, as long as he's able to keep his grip on power. And so far, he's been able to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be some totally unexpected moment where it all comes undone. But we can't bank on that. We can't predict that. And we can't operate and make our plans on that basis, because that might never happen. Look at North Korea. The Kim family has been around for 3 generations. And so, sometimes dictators fall and sometimes they don't. As far as China is concerned, China is loving this. They're just licking their lips right now. They're getting cheap oil. The Russians have to sell them oil at a discount. They're getting markets that the Westerners have stopped selling into. You can't buy an iPhone in Moscow, and so the Chinese are selling their phones in and their cars and all this kind of stuff. And perhaps most of all, China, who is an enemy of democracy, is watching all these democracies having to dig deep into their pockets and expend valuable resources helping the Ukrainians. And the Chinese can just sit there and smile as the dictatorships, score a point and the democracies have to lose a point.
Do you think the Chinese are manipulating the Russians to try and create instability, to take focus away from what they're doing in Southeast Asia? And do you think China is actually, in the same way they have done through Africa, effectively buying big chunks of Russia, buying chunks of Russian natural resources, that if there is a collapse of the Russian Federation, China will then want to go and protect?
Well, it's only upside for China. The whole situation of Russia at war. If it doesn't go well for Russia, China can hoover up the pieces. If it goes well for Russia, it's a win for dictatorships. In the meantime, there's all sorts of money to be made. And just like with Africa, they don't have to expend any valuable resources of their own. and they end up with all sorts of influence that they're getting that we're not. And so this is definitely a win for China, except if Ukraine were to prevail. If Ukraine prevails, then it looks pretty terrible for China in their ambitions to take over Taiwan. And so, the only thing that they're scared about is, is the West cohesive enough so that it would respond robustly if they were to go after Taiwan. And so this is kind of a litmus test for the Chinese to see how we're behaving towards Ukraine. And of course, if the United States abandons Ukraine, that's a good sign for China going after Taiwan.
Yep. Well, it's fascinating, but surely there must be across Russia, with the different elements of the federation, and with the, I don't know what you'd have as a slightly tongue-in-cheek collective noun for the oligarchs that are running the country. There must be something there, but they must be sitting very unhappy that their way of life that they used to know before sanctions came in, before this invasion of Ukraine, has now been destroyed completely, and their families must be putting pressure on them as well. And then you've got the leaders of the different elements of the federation. They must be sitting going, well, Moscow is losing its grip. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to get greater autonomy. Are you picking up anything that is causing or would cause Putin that sort of angst?
Well, he's always scared of someone coming for him, and it's not so much grumbling, specific grumbling, but it's more the fact that whoever runs Russia, it becomes richer than the king of Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's the money is so good that everybody wants that job. Everyone wants to take it away from him. Everyone wants those resources, and so the problem he has and he's always had is that it's a pretty profitable position to be in, to be the president of Russia. Putin's probably the richest man in the world, and lots of other people would like to be the richest man in the world if they could be. And therefore, he's extremely paranoid, and he's rightly paranoid because there are people who want to take his job and his resources, and therefore he's looking out in every possible way to either kill, imprison, or disappear anybody who's going to challenge him. And of course, we've seen lots of examples of that. There was Alexei Navalny, the famous opposition activist who was killed in February 2024 in prison. There was Boris Nemtsov. There was Yevgeny Prigozhin. And of course, there's probably hundreds of others whose names you don't recognize, but were real threats to Putin. So any oligarch who's grumbling about not having enough money, he's grumbling to himself. Maybe not even grumbling to himself because they're so scared. These guys are so scared that at any point it could all be taken away and they could end up dying, that they're just keeping their nose clean, their head down, and just doing whatever they're told to do.
What's Trump's game and what's Putin's game in all of this?
Well, let's start with Putin. The reason why Putin started this war in the first place, and let's be clear, it was Putin that started the war. I don't think anyone debates that other than Donald Trump. The reason that Putin started this war is that he needed something in order to stay in power. Putin has been a kleptocrat dictator for 25 years. He's stolen an absolutely ungodly amount of money from the Russian people. I would say that he and the 1,000 people around him over 25 years have stolen $1 trillion from the Russian state. He's terrified that the Russian people at some point will rise up and say enough is enough. And if they rise up, there's no happy ending for Vladimir Putin. So as a dictator, he's taken the step that many dictators take when they're worried about their own people coming against them, which is he found a foreign enemy, he created a foreign enemy, and he started a war. And I should point out that there was actually no beef between the Russians and the Ukrainians before Putin manufactured it. He created a fake conflict. And as a result, this war has nothing to do with NATO. It has nothing to do with his grand vision of a Russian empire. This is purely a little man who's stolen too much money, who wants to stay in power. And so his game plan is to be at war. He needs this war to stay in power. And therefore, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump or anyone else were to offer him. Donald Trump can offer him the 5 oblasts and no NATO and all of this kind of stuff, and it wouldn't make any difference. Not that anyone should offer Putin anything. And therefore, the situation we're in right now is Putin not having altered for 1 minute his objectives in 1 centimeter from when he started this whole thing. And then we also have this crazy American leader who's made all these promises that he can't keep, and he just keeps on repeating over and over again nonsense in order to try to look like he's the deal maker that's going to solve this whole problem.
Thank you for watching another episode of Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you want more great content, please sign up for Times Radio membership, and then you can leave comments and ask questions, which we'll endeavour to answer in other shows. And if you want to be kept up to date with day-to-day events, please tune into Times Radio. Thank you.